Hey everyone, Ryan here from Omni Lucid Media Games. Here to talk to you more about Drekar Tactics, our first board game that we are working on now and hope to be bringing to you later this year. So, for anybody that watched our interview with Ord's board, you can check him out on YouTube. We did our first official interview with him where he asked a lot of good questions, explained kind of who I am, who my partner Brian Skoll is, and a little bit about who he is, who we just recently brought in to join us in this voyage to bring this game out to you guys. We plan to do more smaller videos just to explain the mechanics of the game and also some of the pieces, while also talking about the history and why we chose those pieces, and just to bring you a little bit more about it. I'm a really big history buff myself, and I really enjoy that stuff. So hopefully some of you do too. So you can either just learn some things, or maybe you're just here to hear more about the game. Either one is sounds good to me. So the first thing I want to say, going forward, since this is my first video, that throughout these videos I will be using the term Viking and Norseman or Northman synonymously, but I do want to explain that they are in fact different. A Viking was a Norseman that was a pirate. Viking literally means pirate. So typically they would get the moniker of a Viking if they were going on raids and stealing and they would engage in ship-to-ship warfare. However, that doesn't not all Norsemen were Vikings. However, through most of these videos, I will be using the term synonymously, but I just wanted to point that out because, again, I really love the history and I want to just make that something that was clear. For the first video, I thought that we should go ahead and just dive right into the name of the game, which is Drekar Tactics. And I wanted to explain what a Drekar is. So, a Drekar is a Viking longship. Vikings had multiple different types of ships. The reason we went with Drekar is, one, because it sounds awesome. Also because it was thought to be the largest warship that they had. They were often referred to as giant longships, and that's because they were just massive ships. Where they get the name Drekar. So Drekar means dragon in the Old Norse tongue. So the reason they had that was because, one, these were giant fighting warships, but also because they would always have a dragon head on the stem of the ship, and then they would have a dragon tail on the stern. And typically these were very adorned with a lot of craftsmanship going down the bow of the ship or the sides of the ship. It would have quite a bit of the Norse knotwork on it. So these were highly sought after ships, and they took a very long time to build. Typically it would take well over a year to construct just one ship. These ships were amazing. They could hold up to, depending on how big it was, there was no set size for a Drekar ship. They were said to have held 60 to 100 men. Typically the Drekar moniker just meant that they had that dragon head effigy on the front. And it was mostly there to scare their enemies and to strike fear. The great thing about Viking ships, and you will see if you get into history and check out what made them so amazing, was just how fast they were. Originally their ships were made to only be going up and down large rivers, and because of that they were basically just wide flat boats, which would be fine for going up and down rivers. Wasn't a lot of current. They didn't even have a keel. What a keel is the large piece of wood that went right down the center of the ship, and that is what would help guide the boat and keep it level. Before you had this here, it was just a flat top, so they didn't have this. In the rivers it was fine, it might rock a little bit back and forth, but eventually Vikings started going out into the ocean, and as we all know, eventually sailing to England. They were sailing around in the oceans. At that point, these boats that didn't have keels were just getting shoved all over the place, and they came up with the solution that they started putting a keel on it. So now, in a previous example, they have this keel, so it's under their bottom. Now when the waves are pushing it, they still have that keel to sit there and hold them straight so they can keep moving forward, and they're not going to get pushed back quite so much. The great thing that they kept about their boats was that in the construction, everything was made very lightly. They didn't have giant, huge planks on the sides of their ships. In fact, they would often split one tree down into 20 planks, and they would usually only be about an inch thick, so not very thick in regards to most ships. They would then lay these planks over, they would overlap each of them, and they would put a type of sealant in it. They sometimes would refer to it, they would use either a rope, or they would sometimes refer to it as a watertight caulk of some sort. Obviously they didn't have caulk as we have nowadays, but they did put a substance in there to seal them. The other fascinating thing about when they would make these ships, they never used a saw. They would never cut the trees. Everything was split, because what happens when they would split these, according to the history, is that all of the splits would follow the grain of the wood. And what that would do is it would help the wood keep its strength, as opposed to if you're using a saw and you're cutting across the grain, it would make that piece of wood lose a little bit of its strength. So they would only split boards, and that's how they were able to get these 1-inch thick planks that they would overlap one another. Again, the boats were still they were very shallow boats. They basically had the keel, and then it came up very quickly and fanned out. So they were fairly wide to compensate for that. However, that made their ships extremely light. Now, not only did the Viking warships have sails on them where they would, harness the wind and they would use that to push them forward, but then also when they would get into these inlets and rivers of the places that they were going to attack, such as England, they would be able to keep the sail up. If they didn't have wind, they would go to oar power. And with that, they would typically have just about every man on the ship pulling on those oars, and they would keep their speeds up at very, very fast for a ship of that size. That's why they would often be described as having lightning attacks on their victims, and why people would say that they were so quick and so deadly was because they can move so quick based on how their ships were built. All that great history for the Drekar ships. As I said, that we love the name of it. Our game is all about a big Viking battle. It's a Viking ship-to-ship battle where pieces are meeting up and attacking each other. Now, I say that because just because they were warships, and ideally we always hear about how Vikings would go and raid villages and that, they would also get in ship-to-ship battles if they ran into, say, a warring clan, or somebody that they just didn't like, or somebody that they said, hey, I want your stuff. They would go up and they would have a ship-to-ship battle. Now, something that I feel people think happen all the time, and it really didn't, was Vikings did not sink ships. Their aim wasn't to sink the other ship, because they knew how valuable these ships were and how long they took to make. The ship itself would usually take about a year, and then the sails, especially. Sails were extremely valuable back then. And those would typically take, depending on how many seamstresses they had working to sew up a big giant sail, it could take anywhere from 6 months to 8 months. If they had plenty of people working on it, sometimes it would only take them 3 months. It all just depended on the size of the sail, the materials they had, and if they had somebody dedicated to sit there and continue working on this thing day in and day out. They would try their best to not sink a ship because they were valuable to them. They would try and take it and keep it for their own. Now, why that matters in our game is because you will see we don't have any tactics that are made to sink the ship or tear up the sails or anything like that. In our game, though, however, you will see your main board, which is the ship board, will look something like this. Now, this is our prototype version. It's all shined up there because we had to use regular tape to put over the top of this. Again, as this being our prototype, it's just on regular old cardboard. Brian did an awesome job of designing out some just regular ship planks for the deck there. We did go ahead, initially they were all the same color. In early playtests we had a few people say that it would be easier because it is a grid movement game, that it would be easier to know where you're going if we had slightly lighter and darker. We agreed, so obviously you can see now that we have the darker and the lighter squares now. Again, more than likely the end game will look very similar, if not exactly like this, but it will, you know, obviously be on a regular board as opposed to just cardboard like our prototypes are. But this is the ship board, and in the game there will be 2 of these that are going to match up, and this is going to be your game board once it goes together. So it's showing that we are going to have that ship-to-ship battle, and that is the Drekar ship. Not a whole lot of pieces to go into on this video, unfortunately. I'm sure everybody's really excited to see more, but like I said, we're going to do lots of little videos. We're going to explain a little bit of history as I did. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that as much as I did learning about it, but I will continue to bring you more, and we will see you next time. Remember to definitely like, subscribe, click all the buttons, do all the things to join in and subscribe to Lucid Media Games so you can stay up to date on everything. I am Ryan Nieders, and Brian Skoll is my partner, and now as well as Jordan Marine, otherwise known as Ord's Board. You can check out all of those podcasts and see what you like, what you don't, but we hope to see you all more so in the comments of Lucid Media Games. So have a good one, guys. Talk to you later.